The great ship, the Stellar Observer, floated in the quiet, inky blackness of space. It wasn't shaped like a pointy arrow or a sleek dart. Instead, it was wide and flat, like a giant, smooth stone skipping across the void. Its purpose wasn't to fight or to rush. Its purpose was to watch. The beings inside the Stellar Observer were called the Cathar. They weren't tall or short, fuzzy or scaled. They were somewhere in the middle, with smooth, grey skin and large, dark eyes that saw in many more colors than humans could even imagine. The Cathar valued order. They valued logic. Everything in their lives, from the food they ate to the paths they walked, was planned and made sense. On the bridge of the ship, where screens showed swirling nebula and distant pinpricks of light that were suns, sat Jax. Jax was a junior officer, training to be a first observer. This meant his job was to look at new planets, new stars, and especially new kinds of life, and understand them. Jax loved his job because it was all about figuring things out, putting pieces together like a giant, universe-sized puzzle. To Jax, the universe was a place of rules. Gravity pulled things, stars burned gas. Life needed certain things to grow. It all fit together neatly, like a perfectly built machine. The Cathar had explored many parts of the galaxy, finding all sorts of amazing things. They had seen plants that sang and creatures that built cities inside gas clouds. But everything they found, no matter how strange, eventually followed rules that the Cathar could understand with their logic. The Stellar Observer traveled slowly and silently, using special engines that didn't make noise or bright lights. They didn't want anyone to know they were there. Their job was just to see, to learn, and to record. They were like invisible students in the biggest classroom there was, the galaxy itself. Their current mission was to study a part of space the Cathar hadn't visited much. They were looking for new planets with life, especially intelligent life. They wanted to see how different creatures lived, how their societies worked, and how they fit into the grand, logical pattern of the universe. Jax checked his control panel. Lights blinked green, showing everything was working perfectly. The ship was on course. Soon they would arrive at a star system marked on their charts as Sol. It was a yellow star, just like many others, with a few planets orbiting it. Initial scans showed one planet, the third one from the star, had signs of active, widespread life. This was what Jax and the crew were here to see. A new puzzle to solve, a new set of rules to understand. He looked forward to seeing the logical ways this new species lived. Days later, by Cathar timekeeping, the Stellar Observer reached the edge of the Sol system. The yellow star was brighter here, a warm light in the endless black. Jax felt a ripple of quiet excitement. This was the best part of the mission, the moment of discovery. The ship moved carefully, finding a spot far out, hidden behind a drifting cloud of space dust and ice. From here, they could watch the planets without being seen. Jax zoomed his view onto the third planet from the sun. It was mostly blue and green, swirled with white clouds. It looked vibrant and full of energy. Senior observer Kira, a Cathar with many cycles of experience, adjusted her own screen. "Energy signatures are high," she stated, her voice calm and even, much more than typical planetary life. Jax nodded, looking at the data scrolling on his display. Atmosphere is complex, biosphere is incredibly active, and yes, those energy readings, they suggest widespread use of technology. Intelligent life confirmed. This wasn't surprising, but it was always a significant moment. Finding intelligent life was the primary goal of their deep space missions. Now came the real work, understanding how this life lived. The Cathar had special ways of observing. They didn't land. They didn't send probes close enough to be detected. Their technology allowed them to scan from vast distances, picking up everything from radio waves to heat signatures to even the faint electrical signals of brains. They could build a complete picture of a species without ever making contact. It was like watching ants from a distance, seeing their paths and how they built their hills, without the ants ever knowing you were there. They focused their most powerful scanners on the planet's surface. Cities glowed with light on the night side. Complex networks of roads and pathways crisscrossed the land. Data streamed back to the stellar observer, filling their computers with information about this new species, which they soon identified as humans. The initial data was confusingly varied. Their technology was advanced in some ways, instantaneous communication across the planet, but surprisingly basic in others, loud, chemical-burning vehicles for travel. Their structures were wildly different in size and shape, and the sheer amount of information being broadcast, sounds, images, strange coded signals, was overwhelming. Their communication spectrum is noisy, observed another officer, flicking a tentacle-like finger across his screen. So much disorganized data, Jax agreed. Compared to the clean, logical data streams of the Cathar network, human broadcasts were a chaotic jumble, but hidden within that noise was the key to understanding them. They just had to sift through it, patiently and logically, as the Cathar always did. They began setting up their long-term monitoring systems, ready to learn the predictable patterns of this new, intelligent species. Little did they know, predictability wasn't always a human trait. Days turned into cycles as the stellar observer continued its quiet watch. The Cathar crew settled into their routine, the ship's systems silently collecting mountains of data about the humans. They learned about the planet's rotation, the cycles of light and dark, and the general spread of human activity. Jax was monitoring the energy grid patterns of a large landmass. Human power use went up and down at predictable times, peaking when their cities were awake, dimming when they slept. It was mostly logical, like everything else should be. Suddenly, an alert chimed softly at Jax's station. A small, yellow light blinked. "Anomaly detected," Jax reported calmly to Kira. "Localized energy surge. Source appears to be urban area on continent designated North America." Kira came over to look at his screen. "Unusual," she murmured. "Not typical power fluctuation. It's sharper, more like a burst." Their passive scanners were designed to ignore random noise and focus on structured signals, like communications or power grid harmonics. But this burst was different. It hit their sensors at a strange frequency, right as Jax's system was performing a deep spectrum analysis of the area. There was a low thrum from the ship's processing core as it tried to make sense of the unexpected input. Instead of filtering it out, the system interpreted the burst, combined with the specific timing of Jax's scan, as a new, strong signal to lock onto. Suddenly, Jax's screen didn't show neat graphs and numbers anymore. It flickered, then resolved into a strange, moving image. There was sound, too, odd noises that weren't language the Cathar understood. Other officers around the bridge made surprised sounds. Their screens, also linked to the primary scanners, were showing similar things. Instead of power data or atmospheric composition, they were seeing rooms, indoor spaces. And in these spaces, they saw the humans themselves. The accidental energy surge on Earth, perhaps a localized grid overload or a powerful, unshielded device, had hit the stellar observer's advanced, sensitive equipment in just the wrong way at the wrong time. It was like a sudden, loud shout that made their careful listening device pick up everything nearby, not just the faint whispers it was tuned for. They weren't tapping into major global broadcasts. Instead, they were receiving feeds from smaller local networks, signals bouncing around within human homes and neighborhoods during the early hours of the day. The ship's powerful computers, designed to translate complex alien data, were now faced with something entirely new. Raw, unfiltered glimpses into the private lives of humans, right as their day was beginning. Jax stared at his screen. utterly bewildered. He was seeing a human standing in front of a reflective surface, making odd motions with a small stick. Another screen showed a human holding a container and pouring a dark liquid into a cup. This wasn't technology use or communication patterns. This was something else, something that made no logical sense based on any species the Cathar had ever observed. The puzzle had just gotten a lot more complicated. Confusion spread through the bridge of the stellar observer like a strange, unexpected gas. The Cathar officers were used to data, streams of code, energy readings, structural blueprints. They were not used to seeing fuzzy images of aliens doing this. "What is this?" Jax heard an officer ask, their voice tinged with something unfamiliar. Not fear, but profound bewilderment. On Jax's screen, the human from before was now holding a flat tool and scraping it across their teeth. The sound was unpleasant, a strange, scratchy noise. On another screen, a human was splashing water onto their face. "Analyzing data stream," Kira announced, her voice trying to regain its usual steady tone. "Source appears to be localized, non-standard human broadcast network. Content: visual and auditory records of individual human activity." Activity? Jax watched the human on his screen spit a foamy substance into a basin. What kind of activity was this? It served no clear purpose that his logic could identify. Was it a medical procedure, a cleaning ritual? But why perform it with such intensity and repetition? They started running the video clips through their analysis programs. The computers were trying to identify tools, actions, and goals based on the vast database of known life forms and technologies. The results were unhelpful. Action: applying paste-like substance to hard structures in mouth. Computer analysis: possible nutrient application. Structural maintenance. Unknown purpose. Action: staring at personal reflective surface for extended period. Computer analysis: environment assessment, self-scan for damage, display behavior, purpose unclear. Action: applying various substances to external skin covering. Computer analysis: protective layer application, scent marking. Unknown purpose. The Cathar looked at each other, their large eyes reflecting the baffling images on their screens. Their entire understanding of intelligent species was based on efficiency and purpose. Every action had a reason, usually tied to survival, reproduction, or the advancement of their society. But these morning routines seemed to defy all of that. Why spend so much time altering one's outward appearance? Why consume hot, chemically complex liquids before undertaking necessary tasks? Why make strange sounds and contort facial features while looking at oneself? "Perhaps it is a complex greeting ritual," suggested a communications officer, though even he sounded unsure. "It occurs in isolation," Jax countered, watching the human alone in the room. "A greeting requires interaction. Could it be preparation for harsh environmental conditions?" offered another. But the humans in the videos were inside sheltered structures. Kira was silent for a long moment, processing the data. This is highly irregular," she finally stated. "Their actions appear non-essential, resource-intensive, and illogical." To the Cathar, using resources and time on activities with no clear logical benefit was the height of inefficiency. It was messy, unpredictable. Jax felt a knot of unease form in his core. He had come here expecting to find a species whose logic he could unravel, whose patterns he could map. Instead, he was watching creatures perform bizarre, ritualistic behaviors that served no obvious rational goal. The universe, for the first time, felt a little less orderly. The puzzle of humanity was proving to be far more complex and far less logical than he could have ever imagined. Among the many strange human actions, one kept repeating across the different video feeds: the preparation and consumption of hot liquids. Humans would heat water, add dark powders or dried leaves, and then carefully drink the resulting mix while it was still steaming. On the bridge of the Stellar Observer, Jax and the other Cathar officers focused their scanners on this particular ritual. What was in this liquid? Was it a nutrient paste delivered in a strange way? A necessary medicine? Their advanced scanners analyzed the chemical makeup of the dark liquid in the humans' cups. The computers quickly identified the main components. Water, obviously, sugars sometimes, creamy substances often, but there was another key chemical that appeared consistently in the most common versions of the drink. "Analysis complete," reported the science officer. "The primary active compound is caffeine. Database indicates it is a stimulant, affects the central nervous system." A stimulant. The Cathar were familiar with chemicals that affected brain activity, but usually in the context of medicine or, in more primitive species, accidental consumption of toxic plants. Why would an intelligent species consume a stimulant every morning? They watched the humans after they drank the caffeine liquid. Their movements seemed to quicken. Their eyes appeared more focused. Some showed slight tremors in their hands. They seemed more alert. "They appear to require this substance to achieve full function," observed Kira, reviewing the data, "like a necessary fuel for their brains." But their scans of human biology showed no requirement for external stimulants to simply wake up or think. Humans had natural processes for that. Perhaps it replaces a compound their bodies no longer produce naturally, Jax suggested, trying to find a logical explanation. Some Cathar colonies used supplements for rare environmental deficiencies. Possible, Kira conceded, but the side effects, the increased heart rate, the reports in their own data streams of jitters and addiction, it seems inefficient. Why rely on an external chemical with negative effects if not absolutely necessary for survival? The Cathar valued smooth, stable function. Willingly introducing a substance that made their bodies jumpy and potentially reliant on it seemed illogical in the extreme. It was like pouring sand into your perfectly working gears just to make them spin a little faster for a short time. They saw humans who didn't consume the liquid appearing slower, less energetic, sometimes even irritable until they had their cup. It was almost as if they were suffering without it. "They intentionally consume a mild toxin that makes them feel unwell if they stop," summarized the science officer, sounding genuinely puzzled. "To feel normal?" This was completely outside the Cathar understanding. Normal function didn't require chemical intervention, especially not one that caused physical discomfort upon withdrawal. The hot liquid ritual wasn't just strange, it seemed actively counterintuitive to efficient biological operation. It was another layer of the baffling human morning puzzle. Another part of the human morning routine that deeply confused the Cathar was the time spent in front of reflective surfaces, what their computers translated simply as mirrors. Humans would stand or sit before these mirrors, sometimes for several minutes, performing various actions while looking at their own image. Jax watched a human on screen. The human was making different faces, stretching their mouth, raising their eyebrows. Then they began to comb or brush fibers on top of their head. Another human was using a tool to scrape their tongue while looking intently at their reflection. "Analyzing mirror-gazing ritual," the science officer reported. "Actions observed include cleaning of sensory inputs, mouth, eyes, arrangement of external fibers, head, face, application of surface treatments, and facial contortions." What was the purpose? The Cathar database included species that used reflection for navigation or to check their physical state after injury. But this was different. The humans didn't appear injured. They weren't navigating. "Perhaps they are assessing their physical condition before leaving their shelter," Kira suggested logically. "Checking for damage accumulated during their rest cycle." It was a reasonable hypothesis, like a quick system check. but the amount of time spent seemed excessive for a simple check, and some of the actions— "Observe," Jack said, pointing to his screen. The human was just looking at themselves, turning their head slightly, their expression neutral. No cleaning, no applying substances, just looking. What is the logical function of this? Their analysis program struggled. Self-assessment was a possible category, but it didn't fully explain the prolonged staring or the facial contortions. Was it a form of communication practice? Rehearsing expressions they would use with other humans? But they were alone. Could it be related to social hierarchy? Offered the communications officer. Ensuring their display is acceptable before encountering the group? This seemed closer, but still didn't explain the private nature of the act. If it was about group display, wouldn't they perform it with the group, or at least closer to the time of interaction? The Cathar found efficiency in uniformity when necessary. They maintained their smooth grey appearance with simple functional methods. The human practice of altering their external fibers, applying various substances, and then meticulously inspecting the result in a mirror seemed incredibly complex and time-consuming for no immediately obvious survival benefit. Why did the arrangement of hair fibers matter? Why the different surface treatments? Why the long moments of simply staring at one's own face? It seemed like a vast expenditure of time and effort on something that didn't help them find food, build shelter, or defend themselves. The mirror-gazing ritual, like the hot liquid consumption, defied the Cathar's logical understanding of intelligent behavior. It wasn't just inefficient, it seemed almost self-obsessed. The puzzle of human mornings was getting stranger and stranger, filled with actions that seemed to serve no purpose beyond the actions themselves. As the Cathar continued to watch the morning broadcasts, more pieces of the human puzzle appeared, but they didn't seem to fit together in a logical way. After their strange rituals with hot liquids and mirrors, humans would move on to other steps in their morning. One common step was covering their bodies with layers of flexible material, clothing. The Cathar understood protective coverings, like spacesuits or environmental gear. But human clothing was wildly varied. Different colors, shapes, and textures. Sometimes it seemed suited for the weather, but often it seemed arbitrary. Some humans wore thin layers in cold environments, while others wore heavy layers indoors, and the sheer number of clothing items a single human possessed seemed excessive. They select coverings based on unknown criteria, reported the material analyst. Not purely for thermal regulation or physical protection. There appears to be an aesthetic component our sensors cannot quantify. Aesthetic, based on appearance. Again, an illogical use of resources and time for something with no direct survival value. Then there was the consumption of food. While some broadcasts showed complex food preparation, many morning routines involved very simple actions, placing flat bread-like items into a heating device or pouring small processed pieces from a box into a bowl and adding liquid. Their nutrient intake ritual is highly inefficient, stated the biology officer. Low energy density per volume compared to our nutrient paste, and the preparation. Heating a dry carbohydrate? Why not consume it directly? To the Cathar, nutrient intake was a quick, efficient process using carefully balanced pastes or liquids designed for maximum energy and health with minimum waste. Human breakfast seemed like a time-consuming, messy, and nutritionally questionable affair. Finally, before leaving their shelters, humans would gather specific objects, flexible containers, bags, filled with various items, and small, rigid pieces of metal or plastic. Keys. These keys seemed important, used to lock and unlock entryways or operate their vehicles. What struck the Cathar most about all these actions, the clothing, the food, the gathering of objects, was the lack of standardization. Every human seemed to do things slightly differently. Different clothes each day, different food items, different ways of gathering their things. There was no single, efficient morning routine used by all humans. This inconsistency was deeply unsettling to the Cathar. Their society was built on standardized, optimized processes. Every Cathar performed necessary tasks in the most logical, efficient way, learned from previous generations and refined over time. Humans, however, embraced variety and seemingly random choices in their basic daily functions. Jax watched a human frantically searching for their keys, clearly stressed. A logical species would have a single designated location for critical items, checked automatically. Humans seemed to rely on memory? Habit? Neither seemed particularly reliable or efficient. The cumulative effect of observing these varied, illogical, and often inefficient actions was building a picture of humanity that contradicted everything the Cathar understood about intelligent life. They weren't just complex, they seemed fundamentally irrational in their daily habits. The orderly universe Jax believed in felt a little more chaotic with every passing human morning. Jax sat at his station, reviewing the compiled data logs. Clip after clip of human mornings played on his smaller screen. A human stirring a dark liquid, a human carefully arranging fibers on their head, a human putting on layers of brightly colored material. He cross-referenced the visual data with the analytical reports. The chemical breakdown of the hot liquids confirmed the stimulant, caffeine. The reports on mirror gazing listed actions but concluded primary purpose unclear. The analysis of clothing noted variety far beyond functional need. Jax tried to apply the standard Cathar xenology frameworks. He pulled up profiles of other intelligent species they had observed. Species whose daily routines were all based on clear needs, gathering food, building shelter, maintaining social order through simple, understandable interactions. Their actions were logical steps towards survival and progress. He looked at the human data again. Where was the clear survival benefit in spending minutes staring at your reflection? How did making strange faces at yourself help you reproduce or defend your territory? Why consume a substance that made your internal systems jumpy if you weren't sick? He scrolled through the notes. Human action. Applying colored paste to facial orifices. Hypothesis. Camouflage for hunting. Status display. But the humans weren't hunting, and the display changed daily and seemed only for themselves in a mirror. Human action. Heating dry plant matter and inhaling smoke. Hypothesis. Ritualistic toxin intake. Communication signal. Their own data showed this action was harmful to their biology. An intelligent species willingly harming itself? Illogical. This action wasn't in the initial description, but is a plausible, baffling human morning action they might see in broadcasts, adding to the confusion. None of the logical boxes fit neatly. Human morning routines weren't about gathering food. That happened later. They weren't about building shelter. That was already built. They weren't directly about defense or reproduction in any way the Cathar understood. The most baffling part was the apparent lack of necessity. The humans could skip these steps. They could consume a simple nutrient bar instead of the complex hot liquids. They could leave their dwelling without looking in a mirror or arranging their fibers. And yet, millions of them performed these rituals every day. Jax felt a growing sense of frustration. His training had taught him that all intelligent life, at its core, operated on principles of logic and efficiency, striving to survive and thrive. Humans seemed to break these fundamental rules with their everyday actions. It wasn't just inefficient, it seemed almost random, or driven by reasons the Cathar's logical minds couldn't grasp. Were the humans hiding something? Were these rituals codes for something else? Or were they truly just doing these things? The universe felt less predictable than it had before arriving at Seoul. The neat, logical puzzle he loved was showing pieces that were bent and twisted into impossible shapes. The species on the third planet was an anomaly, a confusing disruption in the expected order of intelligent life. Jax knew their report to the High Council would highlight this fundamental, baffling illogic at the heart of human daily life.